A widowed ranch owner stood outside a small Montana supply store, clutching a folder of unpaid bills while two men warned her that time was running out. She had spent years fighting to save the land her late husband helped build, but powerful interests seemed determined to force her out. A former Navy SEAL traveling with his loyal German Shepherd happened to witness the confrontation. What began as a simple offer of protection would uncover hidden surveillance, a billion-dollar secret buried beneath the ranch, a suspicious death, and a conspiracy so vast it would trigger a federal investigation. Stay with us until the very end. The first snow of October had not arrived yet, but the wind sweeping across the Montana plains already carried the warning that winter was coming. For years, Ryan Carter had measured his life by highways instead of calendars. At 35, the former Navy SEAL had become the kind of man people noticed but rarely approached. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the powerful build of someone who had spent years carrying heavy packs through impossible terrain. His dark brown hair was cropped short in military fashion, and a light beard framed a strong jaw that rarely revealed emotion. Most people assumed he was unfriendly. The truth was simpler. Too many losses had taught him that leaving was easier than staying. The only constant in his life was Max. The 6-year-old German Shepherd occupied the passenger seat of Ryan's aging cream-colored pickup truck, as naturally as any human companion. The dog was large and muscular, with a black and tan coat, upright ears, and intelligent amber eyes that missed very little. Max rarely barked without reason. Years together had created a bond so deep that Ryan often trusted the dog's judgment more than Sakaran. They had arrived in the small Montana town shortly after sunrise. Ryan only intended to buy breakfast and fuel before continuing north. That plan lasted less than 10 minutes. He was crossing Main Street when Max abruptly stopped walking. The dog stood perfectly still, his ears rose, his gaze locked onto something near the agricultural supply store across the street. Ryan followed the dog's line of sight. A woman stood near the entrance, clutching a folder against her chest. Two men in expensive jackets blocked her path. Their voices remained low, but their body language spoke loudly enough. They weren't asking, they were pressuring. The woman appeared to be around 32 years old. She was tall and slender, despite the physical exhaustion visible in her posture. Chestnut brown hair fell loosely around her shoulders, disturbed by the wind. Her pale skin suggested weeks of stress and sleepless nights. She possessed the quiet strength often found in people who had survived hardship without receiving much sympathy for it. Her name, Ryan would soon learn, was Sarah Whitmore. One of the men stepped closer. Sarah's fingers tightened around the folder. Ryan recognized the expression immediately. He had seen it overseas. He had seen it in struggling towns. It was the look of someone who felt trapped but refused to surrender. Max released a low growl. The sound drew attention. Both men turned. Ryan continued walking toward them. Not quickly, not aggressively, just enough. The larger man frowned. He was in his 40s, thick-necked and heavy through the shoulders, with expensive boots and the confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating others. His partner was younger, leaner, and carried himself with the nervous arrogance of a man protected by powerful employers. Neither liked what they saw approaching. Ryan stopped beside Sarah. "Problem?" he asked. The larger man forced a smile. "Private business." Ryan glanced toward Sarah. She didn't answer immediately. Then she shook her head slightly. That tiny movement told him everything. The men exchanged looks. The younger one muttered something under his breath. Neither seemed eager to create a public scene. 25. After several uncomfortable seconds, they backed away. Before leaving, the larger man pointed toward the folder. "You've got 30 days. Then both men walked toward a black SUV parked nearby. Ryan watched them drive away. Only after the vehicle disappeared did Sarah exhale. It sounded like she had been holding her breath for weeks. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice carried exhaustion more than fear. Ryan shrugged. They looked persistent. Sarah laughed once. It wasn't a happy laugh. They've been persistent for almost 2 years. That conversation led to breakfast. Over coffee and eggs inside a nearly empty diner, Sarah told her story with surprising honesty. She owned a cattle ranch nearly 20 miles outside town. Her husband, Thomas Whitmore, had built it alongside her over 15 years. 3 years earlier, Thomas had died in what authorities ruled a construction accident during maintenance work on industrial property. Nothing had felt right afterward. Suppliers suddenly became unreliable. Banks delayed paperwork. Insurance companies challenged routine claims. Investors repeatedly offered to buy the ranch. Each offer increased in value. Each refusal brought new problems. "I thought they just wanted the land," Sarah admitted. "Now?" She stared out the window. "Now, I think they want me gone." Ryan listened carefully. Something about the story bothered him. Not the pressure, not even the threats, the coordination. Too many separate problems pointed toward one objective. Too many different organizations seemed to be working toward the same result. Sarah finally opened the folder she had been carrying. Inside were photographs, letters, bank notices, property maps, documents she had spent years collecting. "I don't know who to trust anymore," she said. Then she looked directly at Ryan. For the first time that morning, determination replaced exhaustion in her eyes. "I heard you used to do security work." Ryan almost smiled. Small towns always talked. "Sometimes." Sarah nodded. "I need someone to stay at the ranch for 30 days. Ryan leaned back. The road north still waited. It always waited. Yet something about the woman sitting across from him reminded him of people he had once promised to protect. People who had nobody else. Before he could answer, Max suddenly lifted his head. The German Shepherd was staring at one of the photographs lying on the table, not barking, not growling, simply staring. Ryan followed the dog's gaze. The image showed a section of fencing near the northern edge of Sarah's ranch. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. Then he noticed it. A small object attached beneath one fence post. Something metallic. Something that definitely did not belong there. And judging by the expression on Sarah's face, she had never seen it before. Ryan Carter had learned long ago that small details often hid the biggest truths. The photograph remained spread across the diner table, while the afternoon light faded beyond the windows. Max sat beside Ryan's chair, his amber eyes fixed on the image. The German Shepherd's attention never wavered. Sarah Whitmore looked increasingly uneasy. "I've walked that fence line hundreds of times," she said. "I've never seen anything attached there." Ryan studied the image again. The object was small enough to escape casual notice, but large enough to raise questions. It appeared metallic and deliberately mounted beneath the fence post. "Let's go see it." 3 hours later, they reached the ranch. The property stretched across rolling Montana grassland beneath a sky painted gold by the setting sun. Thousands of acres spread toward distant mountains. The ranch was beautiful, but Ryan immediately noticed something unusual. The place felt watched. He couldn't explain it at first. Nothing obvious stood out. Yet years of military experience had trained instincts that rarely failed him. Max sensed it too. The dog stepped from the pickup and slowly surveyed the landscape before following Ryan toward the northern fence line. Sarah walked beside them. Up close, the signs of stress became even more visible. Though only 32, the tall ranch owner carried herself like someone who had spent years fighting battles nobody else could see. The loss of her husband had hardened parts of her personality, but not her kindness. Ryan noticed that every ranch hand they passed greeted her with genuine respect. That said more than words ever could. After 20 minutes of walking, they found the fence post from the photograph. Sarah stopped. Ryan crouched. There it was. The object was attached underneath exactly where the photograph had shown. Not a camera, not a tracking device, something more sophisticated. A compact sensor, powered by a small solar cell. Ryan carefully removed it. His expression darkened. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "I'm not sure yet." The answer wasn't entirely true. He already suspected. The question was, why? Back at the ranch house, Ryan examined the device more closely. The house itself reflected the people who had built it. It was sturdy rather than luxurious. Family photographs lined the walls. Several showed Sarah beside a man with broad shoulders, sandy brown hair, and a warm smile. Thomas Whitmore. Even in photographs, he looked dependable. The kind of husband who fixed things before being asked. The kind of father he probably would have become. The kind of man whose absence leaves permanent damage behind. Sarah noticed Ryan looking. He believed every problem had a solution. Ryan nodded. Most good ranchers do. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Max suddenly stood. His ears lifted. The dog moved toward the back window. Ryan followed immediately. Outside, darkness had settled across the property. Nothing moved. Yet Max continued staring toward the eastern pasture. 5 minutes later, Ryan was driving there. The old pickup bounced across uneven ground while Max occupied the passenger seat, alert and focused. When they arrived, Ryan discovered tire tracks. Fresh. Very fresh. Someone had entered ranch property within the last few hours. The tracks stopped near a low hill overlooking the main house. A perfect observation point. Someone had been watching. Someone had recently left. Ryan took photographs before returning. The next morning began before sunrise. Years of military habit made sleeping late nearly impossible. Ryan walked the property, while Max ranged ahead. As daylight spread across the fields, more details emerged. Several fence posts had been recently disturbed. A gate latch had been replaced. 2 utility boxes showed signs of tampering. None of it looked dramatic. Individually, each issue seemed harmless. Together, they painted a different picture. Someone was conducting surveys, systematic surveys. By mid-morning, Ryan drove into town. He wanted answers. The county records office occupied a brick building near the courthouse. Inside worked a woman named Grace Holloway, a county records clerk in her early 60s. She was tall and slender, with neatly cut silver hair and gold-framed glasses. Years of paperwork had sharpened her memory into something extraordinary. People often underestimated her. They usually regretted it. After listening carefully, Grace searched several public databases. The results surprised both of them. Nearly every ranch surrounding Sarah's property had changed ownership during the last 4 years. Different buyers, different companies, different addresses. Yet many transactions eventually connected back to the same corporate network. Ryan felt a familiar tightening in his chest. The pattern was becoming visible. "How much land are we talking about?" he asked. Grace adjusted her glasses. "Almost everything." Ryan stared at the map. Only one large property remained independent: Sarah's ranch. The realization settled heavily between them. Grace leaned closer. "That's not the strange part." Ryan looked up. She pointed towards several survey permits filed over recent years. Geological surveys, environmental assessments, mineral studies, far more than any normal ranching operation would require. Ryan's instincts sharpened instantly. Now things made sense, at least partially. That afternoon he returned to the ranch carrying copies of the records. Sarah listened quietly while he explained. At first she struggled to believe it. Then she examined the maps herself. Property after property surrounded hers. Every direction. Then, every border, every neighboring parcel, all acquired. Only her ranch remained. The final piece. Sarah lowered the papers. Fear appeared briefly. Then anger replaced it. "You think that's why they won't stop?" Ryan nodded. "I think someone wants what's under this land." The room became silent. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Sarah looked toward the family photographs, toward Thomas, toward the life they had built. What could possibly be worth this much trouble? Ryan didn't answer. Not because he lacked theories, because he wanted proof. That evening, proof arrived. Max was patrolling near a creek running through the southern section of the ranch when he abruptly disappeared into tall grass. Ryan followed. The dog stopped beside a partially hidden survey marker embedded in the ground. Nearby lay several weatherproof containers, professional equipment. Recently used. Ryan opened one. Inside were documents, coordinates, geological readings, technical reports. And one phrase repeated throughout the paperwork: lithium reserve assessment. Ryan felt his pulse quicken. The numbers attached to those reports were staggering, far beyond ordinary ranch values. far beyond anything Sarah had imagined. Suddenly, every threat, every pressure campaign, every suspicious land purchase became understandable. Someone wasn't trying to buy a ranch. Someone was trying to secure one of the largest lithium deposits in the region, and Sarah Whitmore was standing directly in the way. As darkness settled across the Montana plains, Ryan gathered the documents and looked toward the distant hills. For a long moment, everything remained still. Then a small light appeared far away. A drone, hovering silently above the ranch, watching. The drone was gone by sunrise, but Ryan Carter knew that meant very little. People who watched from a distance rarely stopped after one look. The next morning began with silence across the ranch. A cold wind rolled through the grasslands, carrying the scent of approaching winter. Ryan stood on the porch drinking black coffee, while Max rested nearby. The 6-year-old German Shepherd appeared relaxed, but his upright ears constantly rotated toward distant sounds. Years of living and working beside Ryan had transformed the dog into something more than a companion. Max noticed patterns. He noticed changes. And lately, everything around the ranch seemed to be changing. Sarah joined him outside. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally. The discovery of the lithium reports had answered one question, while creating dozens more. "They've been lying for years," she said quietly. Ryan nodded. "Probably longer than either of us realizes." Sarah stared across the pasture her husband once worked. Every fence, every barn, every field carried memories of Thomas Whitmore. For 3 years, she had blamed herself for failing to protect what they built together. Now, she was beginning to understand she had never been fighting ordinary business pressure. She had been standing in the path of something much bigger. The attack came that night. Not against the house, against the livestock barn. Ryan woke just after midnight, when Max exploded from his bed. The German Shepherd charged toward the back door, growling with unusual intensity. A second later, Ryan smelled smoke. By the time they reached the barn, flames were already climbing one side of the structure. Sarah appeared moments later wearing a heavy coat over her nightclothes. Fear filled her face. Several ranch hands rushed from nearby worker housing. Everyone moved. Buckets, hoses, tractors, anything available. After nearly an hour, the fire was contained. Part of the building was destroyed. Fortunately, the animals had been moved before the flames spread. Ryan examined the scene after dawn. The evidence was obvious. An accelerant had been used. The fire was intentional. Whoever started it wanted to send a message. Sarah found him near the blackened wall. "They almost killed those animals." Ryan looked toward the burned structure. "No." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "They wanted you to believe they could." The distinction chilled her more than the fire itself. The next several days brought additional incidents. Fence lines were cut. Water pumps malfunctioned. A ranch truck was vandalized. Someone shattered windows inside a storage building. None of the damage was catastrophic. That made it worse. Each act felt carefully calculated. The goal wasn't destruction. The goal was exhaustion. Ryan recognized the tactic immediately. Break a person's confidence, one small piece at a time. Eventually, they surrender voluntarily. It was cheaper than force. Meanwhile, Max continued discovering things. On the 4th day after the fire, the dog became obsessed with a section of decorative stonework near the main house. For nearly 20 minutes, he refused to leave. Ryan finally investigated. Hidden beneath one of the stones was a small electronic device. A listening device, professional grade, recently installed. Sarah stared at it in disbelief. "You mean they've been hearing everything?" "Maybe not everything." Ryan turned the device over. "But enough." The realization struck hard. Conversations, phone calls, business discussions, private moments. Nothing had truly been private. That evening, Sarah sat alone on the porch, long after sunset. Ryan found her there. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, she said, "Do you know what the worst part is?" Ryan waited. "I keep wondering how long Thomas knew." The question lingered between them. For the first time, Ryan saw genuine fear beneath her determination. Not fear for herself, fear that her husband may have faced something terrible alone. The answer arrived 2 days later, unexpectedly. A truck rolled into the ranch shortly before noon. The driver stepped out cautiously. He was a man in his late 50s, with weathered skin, thinning gray hair, and deep lines around his eyes. His shoulders remained broad from decades of physical labor, but anxiety seemed to weigh them down. His name was Walter Bennett. Years earlier, he had worked as a geological survey technician for one of the corporations now involved in the land acquisitions. At first, he refused to enter the house. He kept looking over his shoulder, checking mirrors, watching the road, the behavior of a frightened man. Eventually, Ryan convinced him to talk. What followed changed everything. Walter spread several old folders across the kitchen table. His hands trembled slightly. "They told us it was confidential exploration," he said. "We were mapping mineral deposits." Buh. Sarah listened carefully. Ryan said nothing. Walter swallowed hard. The lithium discovery changed everything. According to him, executives immediately began creating shell companies to quietly acquire land throughout the region. Owners who sold willingly received generous offers. Owners who resisted experienced pressure. Banking problems, insurance disputes, regulatory complications. Exactly what Sarah had endured. Then, Walter revealed something worse. 3 years earlier, Thomas Whitmore had discovered unusual survey crews operating near ranch property. Thomas began asking questions. Too many questions. "He contacted people," Walter said. "He collected records." Sarah's face turned pale. Ryan remained perfectly still. "What kind of records?" he asked. Walter looked directly at him. "Evidence." The room became silent. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Walter continued. "Thomas believed the acquisitions violated federal regulations and property laws. He planned to expose everything. A few weeks later, he died. Officially, it was ruled an industrial accident. Walter lowered his eyes. "I never believed that." Sarah stood abruptly. For several seconds she couldn't speak. The possibility she had carried quietly for years now sat openly on the table. Not proven, but no longer impossible. Ryan noticed something else. Walter wasn't simply sharing information. He was terrified. "Why come now?" Ryan asked. The older man looked exhausted. "Because they're escalating." Ryan studied him carefully. Walter nodded toward the windows. "They know you're here." A heavy silence followed. For the first time since arriving, Ryan felt certain they were running out of time. Walter remained only 20 minutes longer. Before leaving, he handed Ryan a flash drive. "Everything I saved." Then he climbed into his truck. Sarah watched from the porch. Ryan watched from the yard. Max stood beside him. The truck disappeared down the road. Neither Ryan nor the dog moved. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. The next morning, Walter Bennett failed to answer his phone. By afternoon, nobody could locate him. His truck was discovered abandoned beside an empty county road nearly 30 miles away. The driver's door stood open. The keys remained in the ignition. Walter himself was gone, and with him disappeared the only witness who knew exactly how the conspiracy had begun. The first real blizzard arrived 3 nights after Walter Bennett disappeared. Snow began falling shortly before dusk and quickly swallowed the Montana landscape beneath a curtain of white. By midnight, visibility had dropped to almost nothing. Wind slammed against the ranch house with enough force to rattle windows and shake the old wooden walls. Most people would have considered the storm protection. Ryan Carter considered it cover. He stood at the living room window, watching the darkness beyond the glass. The former Navy SEAL had spent years learning how dangerous weather could become when used by determined people. At 35, his broad frame remained powerful, but experience had become his greatest weapon. He trusted preparation more than strength. Max sat beside him. The large German shepherd seemed restless. His amber eyes repeatedly drifted toward the front door. Something was wrong. Sarah Whitmore noticed it too. She sat at the dining table, reviewing files recovered from Walter's flash drive. The tall ranch owner looked exhausted after days of stress, but she refused to stop. Her chestnut hair was tied loosely behind her head, and determination remained visible beneath the fatigue. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Ryan never looked away from the window. "If I were them, tonight would be perfect." Sarah understood immediately. The roads were nearly impassable. Police response would be delayed. Witnesses would stay home. The storm provided anonymity. Max suddenly stood. Every muscle in his body tightened. Then he growled. Low. Deep. Focused. Ryan moved instantly. Within seconds, he was outside despite the freezing wind. Snow blasted across his face. Visibility extended barely 50 yards. At first, he saw nothing. Then a faint light appeared. Far beyond the northern fence line. Then another. And another. Vehicle headlights. Several of them, moving slowly, deliberately, toward the ranch. The attack had begun. Ryan returned inside. Sarah saw his expression and immediately understood. How many? Enough. For weeks, Ryan had been preparing for exactly this possibility. He activated a control panel installed near the utility room. Across the property, dozens of motion sensors quietly came online. Additional floodlights connected to backup generators, portable alarms activated near access roads. Cameras began transmitting footage to secure cloud storage. None of it was military equipment. All of it was legal. All of it would create records. That mattered more. Within minutes, the first alarm sounded, then another, then 3 more. The attackers were approaching from multiple directions, exactly as Ryan expected. Sarah felt fear rising inside her chest. Ryan noticed. "Stay inside." "What about you?" "I'll be outside." For a moment, she wanted to argue. Then she looked into his eyes. The calmness there reassured her more than promises ever could. Outside, snow continued falling. Ryan moved through darkness, while Max remained close beside him. The dog needed no commands. Years together had created silent communication. Near the western equipment shed, Max suddenly froze. His ears locked forward. Ryan followed the dog's gaze. A shadow moved between drifting curtains of snow. Then, another. Private security contractors, not criminals, professionals. That made them more dangerous. The lead man stepped into view. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and heavily built beneath expensive winter tactical gear. A thick beard partially covered his face. Confidence radiated from him. His name was Marcus Doyle. Ryan recognized him immediately. Former military, private security. The type of man who convinced himself that money justified anything. Marcus raised a hand. "Move aside, Carter." Ryan remained still. "You know my name." Marcus laughed. "We've known it for weeks." That answer revealed more than intended. The ranch had been under surveillance far longer than anyone suspected. Marcus continued. "We're not here for the woman." Ryan already knew that. "We're here for the evidence. The flash drive, the geological reports, the acquisition records, proof capable of destroying careers." Ryan's answer was simple. No. The conversation ended there. Marcus signaled his team forward. At that exact moment, floodlights erupted across the ranch. Brilliant white beams transformed darkness into daylight. Every approach, road, every gate, every fence crossing, illuminated. Several contractors immediately retreated into cover. More alarms activated. Camera systems captured everything. Ryan wasn't trying to defeat them physically. He was exposing them. The realization spread through the attackers quickly. This operation was no longer invisible. Meanwhile, inside the house, Sarah transmitted copies of every document Ryan had collected. The files traveled simultaneously to multiple federal agencies: insurance investigators, regulatory offices, federal prosecutors, news organizations. The upload process would take time. She only needed enough time. Outside, the confrontation escalated. Several attackers attempted to disable cameras. Others moved toward equipment buildings. Each movement triggered additional sensors, additional recordings, additional evidence. Then Max intervened. The German Shepherd detected two men attempting to approach from a blind angle near the southern pasture. Before Ryan even turned, Max had already warned him. The attackers retreated when they realized surprise was impossible. For nearly an hour, the storm became a battlefield of lights, alarms, cameras, and confusion. The contractors never reached the house, never reached the evidence, never reached the server equipment transmitting data. Eventually, Marcus understood the truth. They had already lost. The operation depended on secrecy. Secrecy was gone. Every minute they remained increased the damage. His radio crackled. One of his men shouted something. Marcus's expression changed instantly. Bad news. Very bad news. Moments later, distant lights appeared on the county road. At first, only 2, then 4, then 6. Law enforcement vehicles. Federal vehicles. Approaching fast, despite the storm. Ryan felt something close to relief. Not because help had arrived. Because the evidence had arrived first. The convoy entered the property shortly after dawn. Leading the response was Daniel Mercer, a federal investigator in his late 40s. He possessed broad shoulders, dark hair touched with gray, and sharp features hardened by years of investigating corporate crime. His trimmed beard framed a face that rarely displayed emotion. Unlike many investigators, Daniel listened before speaking. And he had already reviewed portions of the transmitted evidence. Marcus Doyle and his remaining team stood surrounded by flashing lights. No one resisted. The storm continued raging around them. Sarah stepped onto the porch. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. The ranch still stood. The evidence survived. The truth was no longer buried. Daniel approached Ryan. The files reached us 6 hours ago. Ryan nodded. And? Daniel looked toward the vehicles where agents were already collecting equipment and documents. And this is bigger than we thought. Snow continued falling. Federal agents moved across the property. Evidence boxes filled rapidly. Computers. Survey records. Communication logs. Tracking equipment. Everything connected. Everything documented. For years, powerful people had hidden behind layers of corporations and legal paperwork. Now those layers were beginning to crack, and somewhere beneath all of it waited the final truth about Thomas Whitmore's death. The storm finally ended 2 days later. For the first time in weeks, sunlight touched the snow-covered plains surrounding the ranch. The silence felt different now. Not peaceful exactly. More like the exhausted quiet that follows a long battle. Federal vehicles remained scattered across the property. Investigators moved in and out of buildings carrying boxes filled with records, hard drives, and equipment. Every hour seemed to uncover another layer of deception. Ryan Carter watched from the porch while Max rested beside him. The large German Shepherd appeared calmer than he had in weeks. His amber eyes followed the activity below, but the tension that had lived in his body since arriving at the ranch was slowly fading. Animals understood danger. They also understood when danger was leaving. Sarah Whitmore stepped outside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Ryan. For a moment, neither spoke. The previous month had changed both of them. Sarah no longer looked like the exhausted woman Ryan had first encountered outside the agricultural supply store. She was still tall and slender, with chestnut hair and thoughtful green eyes, but confidence had returned to her posture. She was no longer fighting alone. That made a difference. Across the property, federal investigators continued their work. Daniel Mercer had barely slept since arriving. The experienced investigator seemed to operate entirely on determination and black coffee. His broad shoulders remained rigid beneath a dark winter coat while he coordinated teams from multiple agencies. By the 3rd day, the evidence had become overwhelming. The conspiracy stretched far beyond Montana. Shell companies, fraudulent acquisitions, coerced property sales, insurance manipulation, witness intimidation, property destruction. Every piece connected. The deeper investigators looked, the worse the picture became. The energy corporation responsible for the scheme had spent years quietly acquiring land through layers of intermediaries. Executives believed they could secure the entire lithium deposit before regulators understood what was happening. They almost succeeded. Sarah's ranch had been the final obstacle. The federal investigation quickly expanded. Search warrants followed. Corporate offices were raided. Financial records were seized. Senior executives resigned. Several were arrested. Television news crews soon arrived in town. For the first time, local residents learned the truth. Many were shocked. Others were furious. Several neighboring ranchers came forward after seeing the news reports. They shared stories remarkably similar to Sarah's. Loans suddenly denied, property taxes challenged, insurance claims delayed, business pressure that never quite made sense. Now it did. One afternoon, another breakthrough arrived. Daniel requested a private meeting with Sarah and Ryan. The investigator looked unusually serious. He placed a thin file on the kitchen table. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Sarah opened it. Inside were maintenance reports, security records, and internal communications recovered from company archives, documents connected to Thomas Whitmore's death. Sarah felt her hands trembling. Ryan remained beside her, quiet, steady. The reports revealed that Thomas had been actively gathering evidence during the final months of his life. He had contacted attorneys, journalists, and regulatory officials. Most importantly, he had informed company representatives that he intended to expose the land acquisition scheme. Less than 3 weeks later, he died. The official accident report had omitted critical information. Several surveillance recordings disappeared. Safety records had been altered. Witness statements had been changed. Daniel leaned forward. "We still have work to do." Sarah looked up. The investigator's expression remained professional but compassionate. "We cannot prove murder yet." The word hung heavily in the room. Yet. But we can prove a cover-up. For Sarah, that mattered. Not because it answered every question, because it proved she had never imagined the inconsistencies. For 3 years, she had doubted herself. Now, she finally knew her instincts had been right. The truth about Thomas had been buried. Someone had worked very hard to keep it buried. The investigation continued for months. As winter slowly gave way to spring, prosecutors filed charges against multiple executives and corporate associates. Civil lawsuits followed. Several families recovered property that had been wrongfully acquired. Compensation funds were established. State officials launched independent reviews. What began at one ranch eventually spread across the entire region. Sarah spent much of that spring meeting other ranch owners. Some were elderly couples struggling to save family land. Others were young families drowning in debt. Many carried stories similar to her own. Gradually, an idea emerged, a foundation. Not for politics, not for publicity, for protection. Using settlement funds and donations from supporters, Sarah created an organization dedicated to helping small ranchers facing predatory land acquisition practices. Legal assistance, financial education, emergency support. The response exceeded every expectation. People who had once felt powerless finally found somewhere to turn. The foundation became Thomas's legacy and Sarah's future. By early summer, the ranch looked alive again. The burned barn had been rebuilt. Fresh fencing stretched across green pastures. New calves wandered through fields once threatened by uncertainty. For the first time in years, hope felt stronger than fear. Eventually, the day Ryan had been avoiding arrived. His truck sat packed beside the house. The contract had ended long ago. The investigation no longer required him. The ranch was safe. By every measure, it was time to leave. That was what he always did. Sarah understood. She never asked him to stay. Not directly. The two stood together near the porch while morning sunlight spread across the property. Neither seemed eager to say goodbye. Ryan glanced toward the truck, then toward the open road beyond the ranch. For years he had convinced himself that moving forward was easier than belonging somewhere. People left. Places changed. Distance hurt less. At least that was what he used to believe. He opened the passenger door. "Come on, Max." The German Shepherd looked up, then remained exactly where he was. Ryan waited. Max didn't move. The dog simply sat beside Sarah, watching him. Several seconds passed. Then, nearly a minute. Ryan laughed quietly, the first genuine laugh Sarah had ever heard from him. "You've got to be kidding." Max's tail thumped once against the grass, nothing else. The message was clear. The dog, who had followed him across thousands of miles, had made a decision. He wasn't leaving. Sarah smiled despite herself. Ryan looked at the ranch, the rebuilt barn, the fields, the mountains beyond. Then he looked at Sarah, the woman who had survived impossible pressure without surrendering, the woman who had reminded him that strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes it simply refused to disappear. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The wind moved gently through the grass. Summer sunlight warmed the porch. The road north still existed. It always would. But for the first time, in a very long time, it wasn't the only thing waiting for him. Ryan slowly closed the truck door. Max stood. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Ryan looked across the ranch one final time, then toward the home that no longer belonged only to one person. And for the first time since leaving the military, he chose to stay. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive as flashes of light or sudden answers. Sometimes they arrive disguised as ordinary people, crossing our path at exactly the right moment. This story reminds us that when courage refuses to surrender and truth refuses to stay buried, even the most powerful forces can be overcome. In our own lives, we may face seasons of loss, uncertainty, or loneliness, but God's timing is often working quietly, where we cannot yet see it. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more inspiring stories of faith, hope, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, guide your steps, and fill your home with peace and strength in the days ahead.